Okay, here with Dad again, and we're getting into now 1985-86, still flying the Baron, and in our first trip to Oshkosh in '86. So, what can you tell us about the start of those 2 years, Dad?
Well, for example, in January of '85, we took the plane and flew to Ocean Shores, and which is pretty unusual that time of year for that kind of good weather. That was a good trip. And then the annual came up in April, and I dropped it off at Boeing Field for a couple of days while they did their thing. And later on I got stuck with a big annual, but I'll talk about that later. Then we went from that, took a round trip to Hillsboro, check on selling our home down there in Allinger Airstrip, and it turned out there was IFR both ways, and really nasty with ice and turbulence and the whole thing. But we did okay. The old Baron, it was a pretty good airplane in the ice and the IFR, good radio equipment and so forth. And so that was a pretty exciting trip. And then after that, Jeff and I and one of his friends flew up to Arlington for the air show up there. I've been there a number of times, and it was great to show off our Baron because they give the twins, a special spot up there. And then after Arlington, I loaded up Dick Robbins, who was the owner of the Robbins Company, which I was working for at the time and getting ready to develop tunneling equipment for the Channel Tunnel. Him and his wife, Bonnie, and his two sons, and we flew, cleared customs in Victoria, and then flew on up to Port Hardy where he could pick up his 50-foot sailboat and bring it back down. Then I flew back and had to clear customs again in Bellingham, Washington, and then flew on home. And Dick and I did a lot of flying together. I have to tell you about one little trip he and I took. We were flying to NORAD to talk about doing some stuff for the Defense Department. And he's a pilot too, and he flew different kinds of airplanes and finally gave up flying. And so I asked Dick, I said, well, you want to fly the Baron for a little while? And he said, sure. We were coming back, and I hand over the throw-over control wheel to Dick, and he flies along. In about 15 minutes or so, he falls asleep at the wheel. Really funny. Which brings me to another story that happened in France, and I'll come to that later. But he was a great guy. Unfortunately, a horrible thing, he got the company because his dad crashed his twin engine into the Cascades and so on.
Was that a Navajo or something?
Yeah, I think it was a Navajo, a pretty big airplane. And then I was getting more involved in business, and we'd fly up to Canada, meet with different companies up there about building various equipment and all that. And it got pretty good at getting through customs and all that. You'd buy a 1-year pass, and it made it simple. You still had to go through Bellingham and then go into Vancouver to clear customs and on back. And so that was always a lot of fun. And then, but we did in '86 take our first family flight to Oshkosh, and that was via Jamestown and then into Oshkosh, and then we spent 3 or 4 days there. Jeff's got some pictures over here someplace, camping on the North 40, and that was just one of many trips to follow there. The weather was great that time, and then we'd take off and fly one nonstop to Miles City, which was kind of the longest haul, because if you had a little bit of a headwind, sometimes we didn't make it all the way to Miles City, and had to fuel up a couple of times short of that. But then from Miles City, we'd fly into Crest. And then the last thing that we did in '86, work event again, I had five of us flew nonstop on that Baron from Crest to Las Vegas. I mean, we were at full gross and took off. The weather was good. It was in October. And we spent a couple of days down there. And luckily, the gal in the 6th seat in the back was kind of lightweight, so that helped. we couldn't take a whole lot of luggage, and we were down there to look at where they were going to store the uranium, and never ended up doing it, in the ground just south of Vegas from that. And then we flew back, and it was a great end year. And in between all that, I still was flying the Grumman almost weekly and daily, all around for local flights and stuff like that. And that's a great airplane. I still miss it. And so 86 was a good year. And
what did you think of Oshkosh the first time you flew in there? And
well, it's absolutely fantastic. It's probably the greatest fly-in you can ever do. And the best thing is camping on the North 40 next to the runway, on the east-west runway. You can watch all these airplanes flying in. Some of them don't do so well on landing, and we had to score them all. I saw airplanes land gear up or take off and mess up, and it's exciting. And
well, if you remember that year, there was so you have one end of the runway is Lake Winnebago, which is a large lake before you get into the Great Lakes.
Right.
And there was either a Cardinal RG or a 210 or something was on approach, and they ran out of gas. And you could see, I don't know if you remember this, but you could see their landing lights in the distance, and they just sunk below the horizon. They ditched in Lake Winnebago, and they had to go fish them out of there.
Yeah.
But there wasn't, one trip we ever took to Oshkosh where there wasn't something going on, some incident or...
Yeah.
There's been some interesting things, but yeah, that was an eye-opening experience. And flying in there can be, pretty harrowing if you're not prepared for it.
Well, yeah, so yeah, because they can get pretty trafficy, but they really do a good job in directing the traffic and all that. So going to Oshkosh was a great end for 1986, and we went back there numerous times, and I can't remember if it was in 86 or 88 when we put the vortex generators on the Baron, but we'll come to that in a bit.
All right, we'll catch y'all later. So here's a little 1986 in our B-55 Baron, and this obviously our first trip. So you got to keep in mind, if you have kids that you have no hope for right now, you just have to wait to see how I'm dressed, because it's so absolutely embarrassing and pathetic that I wouldn't show you guys, except you kind of know our story. So, but anyway, here's just kind of a little bit of this video, and you can watch here, just check it out and give you kind of the perspective of high quality video in the 1980s.
Going straight, I'm telling you.
And of course, we don't know where we're going because we've never been there before. The place is kind of a quagmire. I apologize for like I said, the low quality. But we typically park on the North 40, which is what this is here, and still do as of our last trip down. And that's the place to be. That's a lot of fun.
Morning. Whoa, wide awake and ready. Can you inbound, bring her down as much as feasible?
And so everybody always has the radios on, listening to the traffic.
Very good, thank you.
And Dad looks nice and slim. Like I say, if you have hope for your kids, just look at me right there. So there's hope.
I haven't seen one exactly like it before.
It gets worse. Go away, Jeff. Awful. Nice hair.
Oh, so it's really compact, isn't it?
Yeah, but then you carry that thing around with you.
So this is what we'd spend hours and hours doing, just sitting here watching the airplanes, listening to the radio, and listening to ATC, direct a bunch of airplanes coming in at the same spot. And that's the biggest thrill. That's really, there's nothing like it. If you haven't been there, there's literally nothing like private aircraft coming in, general aviation pilots and whatnot, and it's always entertaining. So if you get a chance, these videos we do have on our site. It's Oshkosh Part 1 and Part 2. They're pretty long, but it covers a lot of years and pretty cool. So anyway, there's a little taste of that.